welcome to the BuiltOnAir podcast, the variety show for all things Airtable. Each episode, we cover 4 different segments. It's always fresh and different and lots of fun while you get the insider info on all things Airtable. Our hosts and guests are some of the most senior experts in the Airtable community. Join us live each week on our YouTube channel every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern and join our active community at BuiltOnAir.com/join. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor, OnToAir.com. Any business running on Airtable gets the value that Airtable has, but also needs a few more functions to complete their operations. That's where OnToAir comes in. It's a suite of tools for any business running on Airtable to maximize your operations efficiencies and automations. One customer, John, states that OnToAir enables his business to function properly without having to think about building their own software, and that is pretty invaluable. The OnToAir Airtable apps are amazing, and we use them often and are very happy with the results. So join John and hundreds more customers and take your Airtable to the next level with OnToAir. Sign up today with promo code BuiltOnAir for a 10% discount. Check them out at OnToAir.com. And now let's check out today's episode and see what we built on air. Welcome, everybody, to the BuiltOnAir podcast. Good to be back with you after a long holiday weekend. We hope you are doing well. I am Dan Fellers with you live every week, and also have Camille Parks with us. Hello, Camille.
Hello.
Always good to have Camille with us. So it's just going to be the two of us today, and we're excited to be with you and see what's going on in Airtable. So just to recap, for those that are new, BuiltOnAir podcast is a live variety show every week at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We get together and talk about what's going on in the world of Airtable and go through different segments and variety of different topics that we cover. So it's a lot of fun. Hope that everybody can enjoy and join us each week or catch us after the fact, either on YouTube or on our audio podcast as well. Listen to us. So check us out, subscribe, and be a part of the community. So with that, we always like to start on Round the Bases. This is where we go through the different communities and see what's going on, see what people are talking about, give you kind of a recap of everybody's discussions. And as always, we like to start with the Airtable community, see what kind of questions people are asking. Always click on the latest and see what's new. Looks like under the product suggestion, you always get these. Again, this is one started many years ago, 2016. That was before my time, probably before your time.
Probably. I think I'm 2018 is my, yeah.
That's crazy. So this thread's been going for a long time and still nothing from Airtable. So somebody just complaining about time only field. So you can have a date with a time. You can also have a duration field, but not a time only field. So I guess people are looking for a time only field. Yeah. But you could do that with a formula, right? You could extract out.
You could make the date arbitrary and then use a formula date time format and just take the component that's time. It'll be read as a string everywhere. I've seen some people use workarounds with the duration field as well. So it's sort of kind of possible, but not really.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, so it's not ideal, but there is workarounds. Looks like you responded to a couple questions on here.
I did.
What was going on here?
This one I was going to do for the audience question, but I couldn't quite crack it. So I'm not doing this one. But the gist of this was to, if a date fell on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, force it to be the following Monday. which you can do using date add and, a switch formula. But there was some kind of hang up for the Sunday option. I got it to work on my end in a test base that I have, but we're still kind of working through why it's not really working on her end.
Yeah. So it might be a time zone issue.
I think it is a time zone issue. When I turned on the use the same time zone for everybody option in the formatting options for the formula field, it worked for me. But I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Time zones are a lot of fun working with. And you are the de facto date guru.
Not sure how that happened, but here I am.
That is your calling in life, to know all things date and calendars. All right. Actually, it looks like I comment on this one. Let's see if I remember. So this one's a little bit old, but I guess I commented a while ago. So upload attachments. There are third-party tools to do that. Yeah, uploading attachments can be tricky. Our Amplify product, you can actually upload directly through Amplify, either URL, and we also have some products that help with attachments. So
for the API and for, I think all of the APIs really, I think the issue is Airtable only accepts URLs to upload from. It doesn't accept a raw file pushed straight to Airtable. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So the challenge is always getting it into the cloud somewhere else, and then linking to it. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that is the reason why Page Designer doesn't have an option to automatically dump the generated output as a file in an attachment field for the associated record. I think they're running into the same problem as everyone else, that they have to upload it somewhere first.
Yeah.
Which they could choose to do. They just haven't done it.
Yep. Yeah, it's a challenge. We did solve it with Amplify. So I would imagine that Airtable could also solve it if they chose to. Here's one that this actually made a couple communities. It's kind of interesting. Airtable may not like this discussion, but there came out an open source, and they actually call themselves an Airtable alternative, this no-co DB. So it's been making the rounds. I saw it on Hacker News and it was on Indie Hackers. I think it was on Product Hunt as well. So getting a lot of buzz, and I kind of read about what the overall community was thinking about it. A lot of interest. I actually played with it. I don't know if you did, Camille.
No, I meant to. But yeah, we in the BuiltOnAir Slack community, we talk a lot every time there's a new competitor to Airtable. We all kind of take a shot at it and look at it. I didn't get a chance to look at this one. Normally, I'm pretty critical of things that have like the exact same user interface, and this one does have the exact same user interface, but it's open source. So I think my official comment was, I'm going to choose not to be a hater.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. That's what you said. Yep. Yeah. So if it loads, we'll give a sneak peek at it. Yeah, very similar. It's amazing how many companies you see them coming out, and you're like, wow, that looks a lot like Airtable. Not that Airtable was the originator of their design.
No,
I'm sure they copied off somebody else, but
even the color, just
the coloring.
I'm looking at the top the top bar, the blue is very, very reminiscent of Airtable's default blue. The gallery view, it looked, there's only so many different ways you could do a gallery. So there's some differentiation. I know there's a right bar. I think there's the view, kind of like the Airtable universe, where you could see all the tables and all the views on a kind of in a menu on the left-hand side of your screen, and on the right-hand side of the screen is some other thing, and I can't quite recall because I didn't get a chance to play with this one yet.
Right here.
Yeah.
This might be it. Yeah. Yeah. So, so my first impression is, interesting. It's not ready for me to adopt to really use. It's still very early. I think their website makes it look better than it actually does when you actually get into it. It definitely does not have the same, I don't know, something about Airtable like brings joy to use, right? Like that, there's like a secret power to using it. And this one is just kind of lacking in that secret power. And so, but obviously being open source has some advantages if you're willing to host it and manage it. There's some downside to that as well. But they also, many of their views, like their calendar and a lot of their views that they show here are not yet fully implemented. So these are kind of like sneak peek shots of maybe what's coming. But when you actually install the app, you click on like the gallery view and it says like coming soon. And so not quite ready for prime time, but might get there over time. We'll see. So definitely one worth keeping an eye on and see where it goes, see what kind of adoption it gets. There's others out there. There's another open source one called baserow.io, I believe, that I think has a tighter UI. But the advantage to this one is how it works is you store your data in a standard database like MySQL or Postgres, and then this is just kind of the UI on top of it. And so you can keep all your data in kind of a standardized database, and they support multiple, and then it's just kind of that UI layer on top of it, which is interesting. What else going on in Airtable world? Linking tables. Looks like
there was a kind of that one right there towards the center. Sorry, you've exceeded the usage limits. There was kind of an interesting discussion in that thread. A friend of the show, Kavan, is in this thread as well. It was a limit to Airtable that does not come up as often as the number of automations you get per month or the number of rows per base. It was the number of fields per table. Airtable has a limit of 500, and this person in question ran into that limit. And so because the other limits were so much more common, I think there was initial, misunderstanding of what exactly they had run into. And so I thought it was kind of funny. So they were like, yeah, we should have way more records. And they're like, oh, well, I only have 500 records, but I need like 600 fields. And so there was a discussion of, do you really need 600 fields? Can you do more with that? And then does it make sense to have a 500 field limit? So.
Yeah, I feel like 500 is a fair limit on fields. I think that's manageable in any client projects I've worked on. It seems doable. The record limit, I think, hopefully will increase over time. There is some discrepancy on what the actual limit is. It's kind of interesting. People saying they're going higher than the limits that they suggest. So yeah, dealing with limits. Definitely something to keep an eye on. Any other hot topics? Seems like most of them are just kind of, it is end of month. So we're checking out, seeing if they've put anything on the what's new.
I haven't checked yet, so we'll see.
This isn't always very up to date. So one for May.
Mm-hmm.
So Salesforce. I thought this was already new there, but
I think it was either in beta or it was only for certain plan levels, I think. And this may be announcing that it's now available for Pro and not just Enterprise, or
that would be huge. That would be really big news, I think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people use Salesforce.
Let's test it out. Let's try it. Let's see if it shows up. Yeah, it's not showing up there yet. Let me refresh, see if it just came in. No, just box. Let me see if it's in the connected accounts. Salesforce. Hey, I can't remember if that was there before.
I never check. I don't. Yeah. I think I've connected like 2 or so accounts to my Airtable, so yeah. I'm never in that kind of menu.
Yeah.
I think it'd be good if they allow it for not just enterprise but for pro level subscriptions too.
Yeah, that would be very big. Especially for just getting general adoption, people moving. I actually spoke to somebody, actually you might have as well, in the community, asking for, migrating from Salesforce to Airtable. So that could be a huge market opportunity for Airtable to take people off of Salesforce. Having been a long time Salesforce user, I was a Salesforce admin for several years, and so know that space well. And I think a lot of companies would benefit from moving off of Salesforce, and they'd save budget-wise as well. All right, moving on. Let's see what's going on in our world. So we had some similar discussion on that no-code DB we already talked about. Had some questions about two-way syncing. That always seems to come up. At some point, I want to address it with our product. We're close to having, we've got one-way sync going, and two-way sync just adds kind of a little bit more complexity to have true two-way, especially now with Airtable having their syncing. I have heard rumors of maybe them implementing a two-way sync, but maybe not. I don't know.
I think way back when it was announced, I think in like the comments of the Airtable community announcement post, I think they were saying like, we have high hopes for this feature. Some of the things we're looking at include two-way sync, but it obviously there was no like timeline attached to that, or whether or not it was like actively in development, or if it was like, we'll take a look at it next year, or no clue. I imagine they've at least considered it, and I don't know what it would take, how much it would be to rework whatever internals they have to get two-way syncing to be reliable. Because I don't want it in there if it's buggy as all heck, because sometimes Airtable has bugs, and I would rather one base get messed up than two bases at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And then you can get into the cyclical, continually updating. So it definitely adds complexity. I think they prioritize what they just launched a month or so ago of having two sources go to one destination. So they have that now in their sync product. And
that's super useful, pulling in multiple bases, or from like you could pull in other bases and something from your Google Calendar to fill in one syncs table. That's it's a lot of the way there.
Here's a question on regex. That's a powerful formula, and the formulas that can use, I don't know that we ever got a solution for this, but they're trying to convert markdown URLs to HTML. I don't know if you could do that straight with regex. You probably need a script.
I'm looking at it. I think you can. I don't know if anyone's an expert in regex. I answered a few questions recently using regex.
You probably could, because if you extract those, now that you have the ability, right, to insert what got extracted where you want it.
Regex replace. I think you would do it a combination of like the first part up until the first quotation mark would probably be outside of regex replace, and then you would replace the whole string with just the portion that's extracted. That's the URL. I would probably have like 2 different regex replaces in one formula, and then just the bits on either side, if that makes sense. The opening and closing A tags.
Yeah, maybe we'll take this up. We should probably find a regex expert to come on and educate the community.
Kavan is pretty good.
Kavan is good.
She's probably as close as we're going to get to someone who's like an expert. Again, there's so many, and Airtable has a particular, there's no like one regex is the thing. Airtable uses a specific like library of regex functions, and not all of them. There's like a subset. So, there's like a cheat sheet. If you go into the formula help section, it links to what all of the different characters that you could use are. And I'm there constantly every time I have to answer a question because I do not have them memorized.
No, yeah, you look them up just enough to solve your current problem, and then they're gone till next time.
Yep.
That's how it is for me. I'm always relearning regex every time I need to use it. All right, Reddit. Stuff going on in Reddit. I thought this one was interesting. Could talk about. So people often ask, like, can I do this in Airtable? Is this a good use case for Airtable? And so let's see if we think this would be a good one. So old documents, searchable database, metadata is linked to the image. So yeah, I think you could do Airtable with this.
They're saying they want a good single page view, and Mini Extensions has one of their modules is specifically designed to view one thing at a time. So you might be able to, without building the whole thing out in Mini Extensions, you might be able to use that just one little piece of it and have the regular Airtable embed view with like a button that you click and it sends you off to the single page view so you can see things a little bit more in more detail.
Yep. Yeah. I would also plug our Amplify. You could also set up an Amplify screen that had the image and then your metadata next to it.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, because Amplify is available in the marketplace, you can access it if you embed a base somewhere. Is that right?
No, you can't. You can't embed apps.
Well, but you can embed the base. And I think you can.
It won't show the apps.
Drat.
Yeah, I tried that, and not even if you know what I just learned is actually I was working with a client. We were trying to do this. You can't even take the URL of Airtable and put it in an iframe. So Airtable has restrictions, so you can't iframe it. So even if you have like access to it, but you just want to embed it into like another, like they use Stacker, and we wanted to embed directly so that we could get the apps. They wanted to see their charts that they built in Airtable inside a Stacker. And so even though the people have read-only access to Airtable, you can't embed it in an iframe. The Airtable doesn't allow it. And so you can only use the share links of the base, but those don't include the apps. They used to. There was a beta where you could do it, and then they discontinued the beta, and for whatever reason decided not to allow for sharing of apps.
That is upsetting.
Yep.
The thing I do when I make apps, they're usually So far, they're in the form of a more specialized user interface for data entry to replace forms. So it's such a drawback that you have to already be in the back end, if you will, to use the form. And it's similar to Amplify. Amplify is a great alternative to regular editing in Airtable because you can specify only edit these fields. There's the default feature that you've implemented. So you make fields required where it tells you that, hey, you need to fill this in. There's so many things about user interface that can be solved with apps, and it's, hopefully that's on their feature list to add is just the ability to more robust sharing options, which would include apps.
I would imagine. I'm hoping that they're just rethinking how they do that. Obviously, with their pricing model being on a per user basis, they're trying to drive people to add users. And so if you extend the data outside of the login, infrastructure, it takes away from their pricing model.
Sure.
Which I think is part of the flaw of that pricing model, but obviously common in the SaaS world. So we'll see if they ever address that. Hopefully, worst case, there are ways where, a read-only user doesn't count against your pricing. So you can add people as read-only so that then they can get access to the apps, but you can't do any direct live updates of the data like Amplify. If you're a read-only user, you can't fill out the data.
That's true, but read-only users, when you submit via a form, you're a read-only user. There's no, you don't have to be connected to the base at all to be able to submit a form. So maybe if
you could like iframe a form inside of an app.
But I don't want to use a form. I want to use my app as the form.
Well, then you'd have to go through the API.
Yeah.
You'd have to submit it via the API, which is doable. But anyways, yeah. So I think it is doable. I think hopefully that's kind of the conclusion they came to. What else going on Reddit? Send an email by simply clicking a button. So that you could do. So it could run a script, or you could have an automation. That's probably how I do it, right? Is an automation that's looking for that checkbox to be clicked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's doable. Friend Aaron doing some reviews, looking for help. So yeah, everybody, small mountaineering business. I think it could work well. I think SMBs, Airtable is a great fit for. All the companies that I've talked to kind of in that SMB space have really liked it. So check it out if you have a small business. I think Airtable is a good fit for you. All right, moving on to Facebook. Let's see what we got going on. Somebody building out a site in Softer, which is a great third-party app for website building. More page designer struggles. So best practices, our friend Ali got in on this conversation. Yeah, so that's always, do you have multiple bases and tables, or do you just get all your tables? There's always a trade-off, right? There's pros and cons to, having everything together, either in a single base or a single table versus spreading them out. So it's just kind of, there's a art and a science to it, I think, of finding that right balance of knowing when. Let's see, Ali probably has good insight. Yeah, so just kind of, if you it's really if you have a one-to-many relationship, which is I think what she's getting at. If you have one-to-many, then you might want to put that many in another table, especially if it's the many. If the many is finite, then maybe it can be a drop-down selection. But if the many is kind of infinite and created on the fly, then that typically requires a second table. All right, more people learning. There's somebody mentioning our friend, the open source. So lots of people asking for help. Chris, always sharing his amazing bases that he's built. Always good to check out his bases. And so being able to sort or download like specific views, things like that. Firebase. Yeah, all right, let's move on. Getting short on time here. So look at that. It looks like
they're everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah. So people are definitely.
Sometime this week I'll take a look at it.
Although these are all from the company itself. So
yeah, sure, but
looks like they just posted all their videos this morning. Friend Gareth. Some Spanish. There we go. Bubble again. Learning Bubble. So here would be a good one. This one's industry specific. So e-commerce. So using Softer is specific to e-commerce. So that might be good if you're in the e-commerce space. Gareth. Always like his picture of him thinking. There we go. Softer CEO. She was also on our podcast. You can see that one. And her friend Ben. Looks like he had some guests on his show. Food blogger. So a meal plan from Ben. Check him out. Oh, more from Ben. Ben's everywhere. Aaron and Connor as well. So these are getting older. Okay, I was going to add one more to our review. Twitter. Twitter seems to be, we haven't reviewed Twitter real quick, but I just want to see what was going on in the Twitterverse. You always see, usually it's pretty positive. People are, being convinced that Airtable is not scary. They were right. So people picking up Airtable. I thought this one was interesting. Do you think coding will eventually die off with platforms like Airtable becoming the norm? What's your thought on?
I don't think so. I think Airtable is a good user interface is how I like to think of it. And if you're just now getting started with things, and it's the same, like this is a good picture to stop on, all of the other, not quite Airtables they have that they do their own thing, like Trello and Asana, etc. They're great for the user interface and putting the button where it probably should be so you know where to click, but underneath it all, if you really want to do stuff with your data, if you want something more custom to you, there's always going to be a need for coding. Somebody's got to do the coding. Airtable isn't made out of Legos; it's made out of code. So
yep.
There's going to be. Now it's really funny to me to think of Airtable or something similar built out of Legos.
The Lego edition Airtable, yeah. Mm-hmm. I also think Airtable doesn't make coding go away, but it makes it easier to engage with code with their platform. So it does simplify coding and makes it easier to jump into coding. So I think it actually enhances coding, makes it more accessible to a larger audience. You've seen that, I think you've talked about how much you've increased your coding abilities through Airtable.
Yeah.
We see in our community people learning how to code because of the scripting app. And so I think it just broadens the coding universe of who can jump into it. Somebody using their credits, so they increased. Aaron, no coding tools built on Airtable. So
I see a lot. I'm not on Twitter that often. I see a lot of people list what their development stack is for, my product is built out of, this list of things, and Airtable is often one of many.
Here's one, a $2 million startup built on Airtable. Oh, lost it. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. Yeah. So companies raising, millions of dollars and building their product on Airtable, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and then also, the common ones, Notion, that was that picture kind of Notion versus Airtable. They both have pros and cons. I think they have slightly different use cases, but definitely overlap. So it really depends on your use case. So I saw our friend Shay. We should get Shay on sometime. She's been picking up Airtable and photography. So good to see her on Twitter. So yeah, lots of discussion. Twitter's, everybody's always mentioning Airtable, so worth getting it. Yeah, I'm not too active on Twitter, but probably should be. So okay, so with that, I think we're ready to move on to our next segment. Before we move on to our next segment, I want to do a plug for our primary sponsor, OnToAir. OnToAir is a complete suite of products for Airtable. If you are running your business on Airtable, you need to check out OnToAir and the suite of products. I'm the founder of OnToAir and want to give you just kind of a quick snippet of what is possible in the OnToAir suite of apps. We have 6 different apps that you can use to build out your business on top of Airtable. And today I want to highlight our backups feature. So backups is really good for businesses. We have businesses that have critical data inside of their Airtable. And Airtable does do backups. You can see a history of how you are
I don't know for the rest of the audience, but Dan froze for me. Ooh. Oh no. Okay. Well, what Dan was saying, OnToAir's backup option is filling in the gaps in between what Airtable's regular backups can do versus what you can do with OnToAir. One of the limitations of the Airtable snapshots is what they're called, is that they're sort of difficult to reinstate. What happens when you restore from a snapshot is it creates a copy of your base. They're done at regular intervals, but not necessarily at regular milestones. You can force a new snapshot, but only there's a waiting period. You can't force too many snapshots back to back to back. So if you have a defined milestone that you want to back up at, you might not be able to do it. And that's why OnToAir's backup option is very, very nice, is that you can select your backup at any point that you would need. I don't know if Dan will be able to get back on. Sure hope he can. Let's see. Otherwise, what we were going to do was do a focus on one of the fields in Airtable, and then go over an audience question and answer it a little bit in detail of how you might do it. So I say we give Dan about maybe a minute, and I'm just going to ramble on about Airtable in the meantime. We kind of already went over what we have seen in the past week or so in the various Airtable communities for specific kind of questions and topics being discussed. One thing that we didn't go over last week in the Facebook community, Ben Green and Chris Dancy's sort of regular weekly show, one of the questions and comments that we kind of had was over Airtable's pricing model. We talked a little bit earlier this episode about some of the limitations of Airtable charging by user, meaning that they are incentivized as a company not to make it as feasible for external user interfaces to replace so many different users. Hi, Dan.
I'm back. My power went out.
Oh, no. I
So
kind of filled in a little bit about onto air backups, but I'm sure you have more detail. I was basically saying like what snapshots, they don't let you snapshot every, at any given moment. You can make a snapshot and then they make you wait, a period of time in between when you can make a snapshot. But with onto air backups, that's not the case.
Yeah, thank you for filling in. Sorry about that. That's of course live shows that has to happen. So backups, basically the ability to always make sure that your data is stored outside of Airtable, which is really an insurance policy for companies to not be fully dependent on one source and be able to use that. So just real quickly, and then we'll move on, but you can set up a project that allows you to add multiple bases to your project. And each base is completely configurable. So you can actually define which tables you want to back up. So if you don't really care about some tables, you can actually get down to the view level and even the field level and say, I only want these fields to be backed up. And you can specify which attachment fields that you want. This will actually back up your attachment files as well and do that. And then part of the power is you can back it up either as a CSV or a JSON. I think in the not too distant future, we'll support backing up to Google Sheets as well. And it's really cool because it'll auto add tables. So if you're continually adding tables to your base or taking away, this will be smart enough to know that it will add any new tables automatically to your backup. So you don't have to come back to here and reconfigure it with any new tables or changes that you make. Same with attachment fields. If you add a new attachment field, it'll automatically back that up if it's configured. So lots of configuration. We support 3 different sources of where you can back up to. We support Dropbox, Box, and Google Drive. And then you can specify the schedule on how frequently you want to back it up, either monthly, weekly, daily. And some plans offer hourly as well. So you can get it near real-time backups of your data and always have that peace of mind that your data is stored outside of Airtable. So that is the onto-air backups. Check that out along with our other suite of products for you if you're running your business on Airtable. Cool. Why don't we, Camille, why don't we skip ahead actually if you want to do your audience question.
Sure.
Ready for that?
Yeah,
we can come back to it. I changed it a little bit.
I'm ready. Let me share my screen and hopefully you guys, hold on. Now, hopefully you guys can see it.
Yep.
So there was a pretty interesting question that was, I believe, not the last week, but the week before that the particular user had a start date and an end date, and they wanted to know not the number of weeks that was within that time span, but the week numbers. of the year. So there's 52 weeks in a year. And they wanted to know that this event took place between week 2 and week 5. It was a pretty interesting question to me because the answer wasn't as straightforward as, using the date time difference function, which would only give you the number of weeks in between a date range. So the solution was actually a little bit simple. It was just kind of a little bit hard to visualize at first. So we have a start date and an end date, pretty simple. I have two sets of formula fields. The first set shows what the week number of the start date is, and then the week number of the end week is. So starting in week 15, ending in week 17. I also have this formula field, which is just a string of numbers 1 through 53, and a comma separated list. So that's it. It's not even really a formula per se, but it gives a standard uneditable value that I can use in my next formula without me having to type or copy and paste this multiple times in the next formula. The last formula is where the magic happens. It uses the mid function and a couple of finds. So what it's doing is it's finding this week number when it was created somewhere in this list of weeks 1 through 53, and then finding the end week in that same list, and then getting you that piece of that comma separated list. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you look at it now, you'll see 15 and 17, you'll get 15, 16, 17. For this one, which is a much longer time span, you'll see 11 all the way through 22. Some caveats with this particular method is that it only works if the dates are within the same year. There probably is a good method, probably not a good method. There's probably a method of doing this if you have a time span that spans across a year or several years, but then at that point, it's probably not super useful to have a comma separated list of the week numbers if it's, a 3-year time span. So that's not really as much of a concern, but for the initial sort of ask, this is one particular method that someone might be able to use.
Yeah, and not even weeks. If you wanted, a random start number and an end number and then get everything in between, you can use that, although you'd have to create your 1 through 100 or whatever.
Yes. I think the way I did this is I went into Excel and then just typed 1 and then 2 and then used the fill handle to just drag down until I got to 53. And then copied and pasted in here. I don't remember how I got the commas in there, but that's not the hard part of this.
Right.
And you only have to do it once. You just have to consider all the numbers that you might need. And the reason why there's 53 instead of 52 is that, a year doesn't end perfectly at the end of the 52nd week. So,
right. Very good. Although I don't know if we're allowed to say Excel on this show.
Well, sometimes it's useful and sometimes it's not.
I still have it. I might have it. No, I don't have it open right now. I had it open yesterday.
You can do the fill handle thing in Airtable as well, but I think it's a little bit more. I think in Excel, it asks less of you, if that makes sense, of when you want to fill in. Like if I put in, I don't know if it'll even let me do it with a single line text field. If I do 1 and go down, it's going to fill 1, 1, 1. But if I do 1, 2, I think then it'll, let's see if I can click properly. Nope. I think if it were a number field, if you had 2 numbers defined, so we could establish a pattern. Single line text field. I guess it makes sense that it's not a number; it's a string with the value of 1. So whatever. Some things are easier to do in Sheets or in Excel.
Cool. Thank you, Camille. Yeah, very useful. It's amazing, like those formulas, if you really dig deep into them and get familiar, you can do a lot of stuff. Let your imagination fly with that. So real quick shout out. Gonna shout out to Garrett Logren, who's watching, loves the new format. So thank you, Garrett, for joining us. We've also got Hannah in the chat as well. So thank you guys for being with us. Glad you could join us. Okay, I'm going to move on. We're going to do a field focus for this next segment, and we're going to focus on the button field. So if you remember, if you lived pre-button, which I believe Camille and I both did, and we're in the Airtable world pre-button, you remember creating formula fields to generate these links. And then this was basically how you would do that. So you'd have these really long, I had a client that had these really long URLs that essentially were buttons. It was a formula dynamically built off of the record data. And it worked. You could click on this, it would open up in a new tab, but it sure wasn't very pretty. And so when they announced buttons, that was a big deal. And so what buttons do is they allow you to connect to a couple different things. So you can give the name of what you want the button to say. One drawback, I know this is a pet peeve of yours, is this is not dynamic. So it's the same text for every record. So it kind of looks, you can't make it specific to that record, which would be a nice feature for them to add. The formula, so the action is open URL, that's one of them, and then here this can be dynamic, so you can insert your fields and make it dynamic. You can also stylize it, so it could be more like a typical button, or it could just be text and then the color you want. So nice stuff there. And I'm going to come back to the open URL, but just wanted to show a couple other. So you can open a record in a page designer. So if you have built a page designer, this is a great shortcut to go straight to the record that you click the button on. In the next segment, I'm going to show how to run a script off of a button. And then preview URL, this will open up an app. If you have the preview app, it will open up that so you can actually see it'll basically iframe the URL. You can also send email. So this was a question somebody had. You could actually, I forgot that you can set up a button to click and automatically send an email. So this uses the SendGrid app. Same with text and Twilio. Form stack, you can create a document, pixel images, and then also custom apps. You can specify which app you want to open up. So those are some of the actions that you can do. But Camille, I don't know if you knew this. I just learned this when I was setting this up. I just by default put an empty string in the formula. What I realized is the button is now disabled. And so I was thinking, what if is this smart enough to have some enabled and some disabled based off of that formula field? This is something that I'm just learning right now. So what I'm going to do is I set up this formula. So this is a URL that just does a Google search. And I set that formula to only show if this active is true. So I'm going to set up this script to point to that formula. And I want to see if it shows some as active and some as not. And yep, it does. So I didn't realize that. So that's really cool. So you can have at least some dynamic aspect to these buttons where some work and some don't by just having it return in your formula. And you could do this in the formula itself. I could have done the if statement. If it's active, then show that. Otherwise, show an empty string. So that's really cool. So the ones that are active then have the button that you can highlight and select. And then the ones that aren't are not highlighted. So that can come in handy. I could see a use case for that.
Yeah, there's one use case I have for buttons that does take advantage of the whether or not a button is enabled. I do believe it only works with the open URL feature. Otherwise, if you use any of the other options, open in Page Designer, open Custom App, etc., I think all buttons are activated, but it depends on whatever app you're opening to do with that data, if you will. So it would be nice if you could have another formula option in the button options where it says is enabled using a simple if statement, like if the button is active, then you can press and open it up in Page Designer. Otherwise, don't give the option. But, wishful thinking. I have a couple little tweaks I would make to buttons that,
Yeah, for sure. So there's a cool little trick for you. So buttons are really, really useful. I think, the other thing that I want them to do is allow buttons to work inside of custom apps.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't work. It'll load it. It'll just load it in a URL, but it'd be nice if from inside a custom app, you could click on a button that ran a script.
Yeah.
I hope that they consider that. I know for our Amplify, we show the buttons, but you can't really interact with what they do unless it's an open URL, then it'll open. So that's really the only action that you can kind of really support inside a custom app, which is frustrating. So with that, I'm going to kind of move on to the next segment, which is a scripting time. So now we're going to combine scripting apps with the feature of a button and how they interact and some of the nuances that go with buttons. And then we'll wrap it up with a plug for BuiltOnAir. So now if I'm going to change this, and you can see I had the label as run script in preparation for this. So now I'm going to change the action to run script. And so you just do that, and then you'll select the dashboard. So your dashboards are in your app here. I don't want to click away, but anyways, this shows you all the different dashboards that you have. So I created a dashboard called scripts that has the script in it I want. So this has several dashboards, and then it'll find the one app name. And so now this will run a script every time I click on it. And see now these are all dynamic because you can't really add a formula to this. So it runs on all of them. So if I click on this run script, it's a very simple script that I'm going to show. And it just tells you what table you're on and then just prints out the ID and the name of the record that you clicked on. So anytime I click on a different record, it's going to show me that record's name and record ID. So this is really powerful. I use this quite a bit. If you're comfortable writing scripts, you've likely set up buttons to trigger a script, and great way to just process your record, do all sorts of stuff with it. So now if we look at the code inside of here and bring this up, there's a couple of things that you can do. So the second line is how you associate it with a button so that you know which record clicked on that button. So they have an input.record async, and you have to make sure that you put your await, and they tell you if it's async, then you need to put an await on there. And then this is just the text that goes over the button that would show up here. And then the interesting thing that I did here is usually you're associating the table by name. But what I did here is I used this cursor active table ID. So this tells you, this is kind of a dynamic way of knowing where you are within the base. So it knows that the cursor, meaning which table is selected. So it knows that I'm on the leads table when I click this button. So that's what that cursor.active table ID is. And so the benefit of that is I can have one script that now can be run from multiple tables. So if I go over to the sales rep table and set up a button and have it point to that same script, it will be smart enough to know which table I'm coming from. And so the exact same code works on either table that you're running the script from. So the same this same button or a button in two different tables, when I click on it, now it knows I'm on the sales rep table. So I didn't have to edit my code at all to be able to support both tables like that. And then it just prints out, does a markdown on the table name, and then outputs the table record. So that is really cool. You can write one script, and then you can kind of do some if else as you get more advanced in what you're doing. You might say, okay, if my current active table ID, or you can also get the table name that would also work. Actually, you would just get the table ID, and then from the table you would know the name, and you could use that and say, okay, if the name is the leads, then I need to do this. You need to know like what your records ID or your field names are, if you're doing any kind of updates or any more processing than a simple output like this. So that cursor, and then also this. And then how this works is it actually works in either scenario. So if I want to run it, instead of automatically running like it does from a button, it gives you the choice to pick a record. And this record these are coming from whatever active table that you're currently on. So right now I'm on the sales table, but if I were to go to the leads and click on and then run this, now all of the records that show up here are the leads, the companies. So it's dynamic based off of that cursor. So it comes in handy, really useful for otherwise you don't, the concept in programming is dry, don't repeat yourself. So if you want code that can run on multiple tables, this is a better approach than creating two scripting apps, one for each table, where the code is essentially replicated for the most part. So very useful in your scripting stuff. Any other insights there, Camille?
Just really quickly, when you're running a script from a button, it will fill in the first input.record async that it finds in the code. So the method that you use is actually really, really useful in that regard, meaning if you have to collect information on more than one record, only the first record that you're asking about is filled in by the button. You can't say, use this record for like the third time I ask for what record it is. So knowing ahead of time what table to pick from and letting that be dynamic is actually pretty useful.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So there's our scripting time segment. And just before we end, I want to give a plug for our BuiltOnAir community. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you're somewhat familiar with it. But if you have not signed up for our newsletter and our Slack community, check us out, BuiltOnAir.com. There's a lot of stuff happening. We do a weekly write-up of a lot of the stuff that we talk about, what's new in the community, our podcast. You can find us there. We also have resources, guides for different industries, a script library. You can find scripts like the one that I'll put up there, the one that I just did, and you can find many more in our scripts library. You can also do comparisons of Airtable versus competitive products. Every month, we'll actually, today, since it's the start of a new month, we look at the universe and we'll give metrics on what's happening in the Airtable universe. You can also see all the products and service providers and different communities all related to Airtable. So it's a really great hub for everything Airtable related. Check it out. Sign up to our newsletter, join our Slack community, and join us and follow us on all the social media platforms and our podcast and YouTube channel. We'd love to have you and participate and get your feedback on what else we can do to improve. So thank you for our time. Thank you, Camille. Apologies for the technical difficulties. And thanks, Camille, for filling in there. And we will see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. can't get out. Oh, there we go. Thank you for joining today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out our sponsor, ontoair.com, and we will see you next time on the Built on Air podcast.